The two brothers Ludwig and Robert Nobel were just as industrious as their brother Alfred Nobel, the founder of the Nobel Prize. In the 1870s, in Russia, they built the world's largest oil company, Branobel. This is their story.
Well, to start with, Alfred Nobel, the great donor of the Nobel Prize, he had three brothers. One died in a dynamite explosion, but the other two, they lived in Russia, where Alfred also was brought up. And they started a machine factory, Ludwig Nobel machine factory. So they had a base in Russia, and they knew Russia, and they knew the politics and well, how to get around there. And they did quite a lot of rifles for the Russian army. And one time they got an order for 500,000 modern rifles, so-called Badankur. And to make that rifle, you had to have the butt of that is the end of the rifle, that should be by a special kind of tree, a walnut tree, and that was supposed to be in Caucasus. So Robert Nobel, the eldest brother, he went to Caucasus. And on that trip, on a ship on Volga, he met the commander, the captain of the ship, and he happened to have an oil distillery in Baku. And Robert, as a very impulsive person, he bought it. And that was the beginning of the adventure in Baku, Azerbaijan, where Robert and Ludwig built the world's next biggest oil company for that time in Baku, and that was called the Naphtha production company of the brothers Nobel. This was in the 1870s, and it was a very special time because the Tsar had that year said that it was okay to buy land in Caucasus, in the Baku area where they had oil fields. They were not allowed before. And the demand for oil was increasing rapidly for the industry and for the lighting, and after a while, of course, for autos and cars. So the demand for oil was big, and you could invest because you could buy it. So everything was there for a growing company. The biggest problem with oil in Baku, Azerbaijan, it is distribution. That was a weak point because it was distributed in barrels that was drawn by a donkey or a horse. So one barrel for each horse. So the transportation cost was much more than the value of the content. And they were thinking about that, and then they invented very things that now are so natural. They invented pipelines. Instead of having barrels, they just pumped it through these pipes, and then when they were transporting it into Europe and Russia, they invented the first tanker, oil tanker. Instead of having barrels, they just had the oil to flow down into the boat, and they had the mechanical factory that could produce everything they needed. So it was a vertically integrated company. I mean, they did everything for themselves. They didn't have to buy spares, they did the spares for themselves. And they were thinking in human resource management long before we invented that word. They figured out, as Swedes used to do, that to have a good working stock, you have to help the workers in their life. So they built schools, they had a retirement system, they had bonus systems, they built hospitals for their employees, because it was a win-win situation for them and for the workers. So that was an important thing. Well, they were the second biggest at that time. It was Standard Oil was the biggest, and then Nobel's come, and then Rockefeller. And they were competing all the time, of course, and stealing things from each other, as companies do. But they worked together. Rockefellers were in Baku, in Azerbaijan, and so were the Nobels. And they built railways to the Black Sea, and they made a tunnel, they blew a tunnel through the Caucasus, like to have it more faster to transport, because the Caspian Sea is landlocked, they don't have any way out to the big seas. So they had to transport it from Azerbaijan, Georgia, down to Batum, the capital, the seaport of Georgia. And still in that little town, not so little anyway, there is something called the Nobel Town, still used as a name, Nobel Town. And there the Kazakh oil is nowadays. And there still is reminders of the Nobels from tanks and all that. I have been traveling to Baku a couple of times in the last decade, and because there are so many people in the government and ordinary people who are so interested in the history before the Soviet Union, also the pre-revolutionary history. And the Brothers Nobel's oil factory, oil production company, is a vivid memory, and they want to recapture it. And they really, together with us in the Nobel Family Society, are digging into the archives more to understand what was happening and to describe this fantastic, glorious history.
It took the Brothers Nobel only a few decades to build Branobel into a global oil giant. But the company's glory as an independent company didn't last many decades into the 1900s. In 1917, the Russian Revolution happened. For more about this, and about Ludwig and Robert Nobel and their company Branobel, visit brothersnobel.com.